Welcome, everybody, to Axioms on Trial, episode 44. It is Monday, May 31st, 2021. I was like, is it Sunday or Monday? It's my mama's birthday, so everybody wish my mama happy birthday. They're in the...
Birthday.
Yeah, I was going to go see them, but they are actually at a winery somewhere in North Georgia Mountains, so they're having a blast right now. But anyway, we got a really cool episode. Well, I guess before I get into the episode, if you missed it, yesterday I was my first hosting job on Talk Heathen, which was extremely nerve-wracking, and we got through it. So if you want to go see that, it was a little slow at the beginning with callers, but towards the end we got some theist callers, and it was a lot more productive. Yeah, thank you, appreciate it. It was good. I was glad to have Christy. I didn't know Christy very well, but it was good to have somebody that looked like me, and I could just say if I messed up, it was actually him because we looked enough alike. So, but anyway, yeah, great episode. I'm going to pass it to Cease. Cease can kind of fill us in on what's going on today, how you've been in the absence of the weekend and whatnot like that.
Well, I'm better today that it's nicer outside. The last couple of days are kind of miserable, but it was a beautiful sunny day out today. So.
It's been amazing in Georgia from 100 to like 75, which is great. Going from like the hottest temperature ever to like, oh yeah. So I feel you there. But
yeah, I'm excited for this conversation. I've been wishing to talk to Professor Sich for a while. So I'm glad that he was able to come on. So yeah, let's get right into it.
Sure. Yeah. So do you want to go ahead and introduce our guest, and I'm just going to go ahead and pull them in, and then we'll have, here we go, figure this out. How many times have we done this? I can't press a button, but we'll do it. Thank you, Alex. Alexander, Alex, what do you prefer to go by? Professor, doctor, what is the title that you prefer?
Friends call me Al, baby. You know, it's...
Oh, so okay. I like the kids Alex, casual.
Fine. Alex is perfectly fine.
Anyway, yeah, would you like to kind of give the viewers a little background information on yourself? Anything that you feel might be necessary, the conversation, things that you like to do, hobbies, sports, whatever. Anything and everything that kind of humanizes you for the audience and gets to know you a little bit.
In a 140-character tweet, right?
Yeah, that's basically, I like that in your article. You had that. I actually really attached to that a lot. It was like in the world of that's dominated by the 140-character tweet. I liked that a lot. So
there was a humorous incident. I was attending a conference in Montreal, and I was introduced to introduce myself, and I don't like speaking about myself, especially, there's lots of stuff that I've done. But the way he introduced me was just beautiful. It was just beautiful because he said, I would like to introduce a Ukrainian nuclear Thomist of the strict persuasion, which pretty much encapsulates it. Now, how do I unpack that? Okay. Do you want me to talk about my academic bona fides? Do you want me to talk about what I did?
Yeah, I mean, it helps. It makes you look good. It makes us look good as having credentialed guests. So yeah, I mean, we can start with that. So
let's whip off just the facts. So I'm teaching physics right now at Kennesaw State University. I taught physics for 9 years at a prior university. I took a break for 2 years to teach math at a charter school. Prior to that, my life was pretty much completely in Ukraine for about 14 years. However, during my first physics teaching thing, I also did a Fulbright in Ukraine. So why was I in Ukraine so long? Because I'm a nuclear engineer. My PhD is in nuclear engineering from MIT. And my thesis was, my dissertation was on the Chernobyl accident, or rather what happened after the Chernobyl accident. I also have a degree in Soviet studies from Harvard University, a degree in philosophy, Aristotelian Thomism from Holy Apostles in Connecticut, and an undergraduate Bachelor of Science in Physics, in Nuclear Engineering and Physics from Rensselaer. So that's kind of like facts. We spent many years in Ukraine, during which time, interestingly, I got enamored by philosophy and got sucked in to the point where I went out and pursued this second master's.
We understand completely that. I mean, not to that degree, but I understand the love. That's for sure.
Well, I mean, dude, it's like my wife would actually get jealous of me because I'd stay up throughout the night reading and
Sure.
Which, interestingly, I may have one time in my life pulled an all-nighter while studying nuclear engineering, but never, even though I loved it, never even closely to the extent of staying up nights just reading and reading like philosophy. Because
100%. Yeah, I've actually played music for 15 years, and like I've never dove into music theory as heavily and how things work and resonance and like, resolving chords and these types of tensions. But then it's like right to my, my right, it's like I'll have just these stacks of books. Like, yeah, I'm going to go through, I'm just going to binge read, so I completely understand that. Yeah.
So, that's kind of a very, very kind of fast facts. My commitment, my I guess, academic and philosophical commitment is to Aristotelian Thomism, which may sound strange given that my other bona fides are in the natural sciences and engineering from, Harvard and MIT. So is that enough for?
Well, I would want to add that's probably a good thing for Thomists, right? To see somebody that might have the level of knowledge you have in physics, or maybe even how you reconcile what maybe a naturalist might present to you in terms of some problems there, and how you address those. So I think that's a good thing, because it's to show it's not just some kind of relic in the past, so to speak, or something for people.
Very, very true, but the other side of the coin applies equally, and in some cases, I think even more so. I don't know of any famous or well-established scientist or engineer that, for example, is let alone understands Aristotle or Thomas and where they're coming from.
Sure. I know that, like Sage, we were talking about how Thomism is such a kind of a large discussion, and it would take days just to deal with some aspects of it.
Sure.
But hopefully this can be an ongoing conversation, because I am curious to at least touch on some of its ideas, and some of where I think some of the tension lies between Thomism and I think modern physics. But one thing that I am really curious about is that you had mentioned feeling kind of disenchanted with the way in which some scientists talk about science. One thing I can say that I do agree with you on, reading the articles that you sent me, was, with the scientists who claim that philosophy is dead, or kind of dismiss philosophy as unuseful. Obviously, I do philosophy for a living. Like, I think that is a very absurd perspective to hold.
Sure.
That said, there were some things that I definitely want clarification on, because I was a bit confused.
So is there a specific question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think the one thing I'm trying to understand is what you mean by there being alternative ways to knowledge outside of the scientific method. Because while I agree that science doesn't have to be what's what I'm looking for, restrained by assuming naturalism. Like, it's ontologically, it doesn't have to. There's not a necessary contradiction between God and science.
Nor was there ever.
So here's where I disagree, is that I think there's not a necessary contradiction, but there is a conflict from my perspective, currently, in the way in which these conversations are tackled. Meaning, from my perspective, science has a way to make novel predictions and verify those predictions. And I think theism could do that. But I don't think it has yet. And I may be wrong, but that's my perspective looking into these things, where I feel like, how can we talk about knowledge? And I don't think science gives us certainty, but how can we talk about knowledge where when theism lacks the ability to separate the imaginary from the actual? That's where I run into issues there.
Give me an example of what you mean, the imaginary.
So the idea of God, for example, why should I believe that claims about God and its existence are referring to something in reality out there, as opposed to anything that can be explained away psychologically? That's the difficulty I have. And I agree that to some degree science has the same problem, because I don't think science gives us absolute certainty. But I think science is a better tool. It can do more than I think alternatives have done so far. And if I'm,
it's a huge question. I mean, I could tons of things are popping to mind. The first one is no self-respecting Christian, for example, would ever consider God an object.
Right.
Not an object. Let's start with that. And that's one of many things that's missed. Let's say if we take the example of Aquinas' 5 ways, that's much of what's missed by people who try to take apart what is at heart a metaphysical argument with the tools that are used by the modern empirical sciences. It doesn't work that way, right? It can't work that way.
You would just be saying like you wouldn't be able to reference it like you could some other particular, essentially.
Well, let's move on to the word science, right? Science, unfortunately, the way it's understood these days is largely through the lens of what are called the modern empirical sciences. And you have what I believe to be ridiculous jealousies from, let's say, softer social sciences, that they have to be metrical and predictive on the same way, in the same way, or in the same manner that the modern empirical sciences like chemistry and physics and whatever do. That's nonsense from the perspective that they simply study altogether different kinds of objects. For example, justice. Now, there's plenty of people out there, from Dawkins to Tyson to others, who will insist that everything is capturable by the modern empirical sciences. Let's leave aside the obvious point that that's a philosophical statement, not a modern empirical science statement. Okay, demonstrate it to us, but you never get that demonstration, right? Science writ large is, if I use one of the definitions, is immediate intellectual knowledge obtained through demonstration. Right? Immediate intellectual knowledge obtained through demonstration. Immediate because we need a process by which to go from not new knowledge to newer knowledge. Intellectual because it demands a rational being to be able to do that. No brute animal can do science because it doesn't even have the capacity for thinking in universal terms with ideas. Images, sure. Do animals think? Of course they think, but they don't think rationally or universally.
Well, would you agree that they would be applying inductive inferences, but not necessarily having like a second order tier of acknowledging the kind of inference rules, right? Because I still feel like they're applying inference rules, right? In some way that would be deemed rational, but just not having that level of understanding them.
Sure, you could. I hesitate to go that far, but I'll agree with you just for the moment that Yeah, that's the process. You could describe that process reductively that way. I agree with you. I have no issues with that.
Mm-hmm.
What can't happen is reflecting upon that. For example, give a dog, you've got a very hungry dog in front of you, and you have a bowl of very aromatic, beautiful filet mignon, right? And you, even if you could speak to the dog, which is impossible, right? But if you could speak to the dog and you say, if you wait for 10 minutes, I will give you double what I'm holding here. What will the dog do? It'll salivate. It has no ability to conceive, meaning through conceptions. It can image things, but not in a universal sense. What is time for a dog? A dog has no ability to reflect upon the idea of time, and that's the large issue.
Yeah. So what would be like I'm trying to. So if I grant that, because if I would say it doesn't have the second order ability to kind of understand it, what's like the implication or entailment?
In other words, they are irrational. Reality presupposes the ability to reflect back upon thinking. That's what rationality is. The ability to self-reflect and to reflect upon thinking.
I agree with you that no animals can do it to our ability. I've read recently some things about certain species of chimps and as well as crows supposedly having some capacity of reflection. Now, how they would know that, it's hard for me to understand or how accurate that is. But
exactly, but that's the point. Sorry to interrupt. That's exactly the point. Musing about possibilities is fine, but actually coming to a point where you can demonstrate
right.
That's where the science, and I'm using that term very, very intentionally, that's where the science begins. We can muse
Right.
about flying spaghetti monster or about God or about the Higgs boson. But until we actually get down to demonstrating, and that's why I come back around full circle to the definition of science. Immediate intellectual knowledge obtained through demonstration, not limited to putting something in a scale and measuring it. Measuring is not demonstration. Measuring is not demonstration. Demonstration, in one sense, if you go with this commitment, is the conclusion of not just a valid but a sound argument, which means each and every one of its propositions are true, demonstrably true, right? So I don't really care at a certain level, and I don't mean to sound crass, but there's enough of this kind of garbage out there that it really, gets my dander up. I don't really care if someone says that Coco the gorilla thinks because they can draw figures of hearts or whatever. That's not a demonstration of rational thought. Animals are incredible creatures. In many cases, not just some, in many cases, they far exceed our ability to take in sensory knowledge and to process it. Like, for example, many animals can, quote unquote, foresee earthquakes. We can't. Many animals can survive because of their instincts and what they're equipped with materially and whatever, whereas we can't. We can survive in much harsher conditions. Why? Because we're rational. We can come to rational. An oriole doesn't debate, never does an oriole debate the aesthetic qualities or the engineering sophistication of its nests, but instinctually it does incredible things
Right.
that I would challenge most any human being to do by themselves.
Sure. No, I think I'm basically in agreement with you, although I think the key issue here is what is meant by demonstration. I agree with you that we shouldn't reduce science to just measuring. From my perspective, I think the key aspect of science that I think sets itself apart from other methodologies is its ability to verify its predictions. I think that's where the value lies.
But We do that. I'm sorry, but we do that in everyday non-science life as well. What you're talking about is a very narrow part of what's called the epistemic cycle, right? A kid goes into a kindergartner goes into his room, another kid takes his blocks and gets away with it. He tries it again the next day and he gets socked by the kid. He learns, he's verifying. That's part of the grander epistemic cycle. The narrower epistemic cycle, which is studied by, which is the object of study by the philosophy of science, as opposed to the philosophy of nature, is, among other things, the scientific method, right? Most modern scientists are so enamored by the epistemic questions that they forget the ontological questions, which are the purview of the philosophy of nature. And that's the thing that really got me started, right? That's the thing that really got me started. When I hear scientists like Max Tegmark or Steven Weinberg suggest that, and I've got the New York Times quote, I could find it in a few minutes, suggest that the laws Weinberg, a Nobel laureate, high energy physics, suggested strongly and doubled down on the claim that the laws of science are as real, and I'm quoting, as real as the rocks in the field. That is pure Platonism, and it is nonsense because he can't demonstrate that. He can't demonstrate himself stubbing his toe on a law of nature. The other irony behind that is when you see people like Tegmark and these other guys talk about these things, they talk about the laws of nature or the laws of physics or whatever, as if they're Platonic policemen directing traffic here on Earth, which means things here on Earth have no natures. They're just inert little things that obey the laws of science. It's not, or the laws of nature. It's nonsense. There are no such things as laws of nature, as in terms of Platonic kind of out there in Platonic la la land. What the laws of nature are metaphors describing order in the real world. A kangaroo behaves the way it does because of its nature. Another thing that the modern empirical sciences interestingly decry. A rock behaves per its nature. A human behaves per its nature. And it keeps, and then the errors just keep on going and going and going to, for example, to quickly transition to the article that you read, the reification. I mean, think about it for a minute. How many times have you heard or read that Newton's laws of motion govern the behavior of such and such thing in its trajectory? Think about what is being said there. It's absolute nonsense.
So I feel like I would want to question, like, so you would be taking this more in a line of like how we would look at, say, like laws of thought, for example, is just mere descriptive of relational behaviors, right? So
not that simply, not that reductively. No, not at all.
So you're not stating that it's merely descriptions of something we would categorize relationally, like say with the so you are saying that. Yeah, okay.
Of course it's not reduced to that. What I'm saying is that it's misdirected. When modern empirical scientists who have essentially no training or experience in common sense reflection upon broader issues, in other words, stated philosophy, then they begin to say things that are on their face ridiculous.
But if they're all models, I guess that's where my pushback is if like they're models and then the models are updated over time or things like that, wouldn't those just
that's not what
okay.
I'm talking about when someone claims that Newton's laws of motion dictate or govern the motion of such and such object. Or, let's go further. When a scientist says that space-time bends and twists and warps, there is no such thing as space-time out there. And I know a few good physicists who realize that and realize that that's a potential stumbling block for actual progress. Space-time is a mathematical formalism that describes the behavior of actual real substances, objects out there. It's not something that's controlling those objects. Those objects behave because of their natures.
But isn't that also, like, how do we demonstrate that things have an inherent nature of the source you're describing? I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm trying to sort of understand what it is that's being expressed. I guess, how will you demonstrate the concept of nature as such?
How about simply by observation, right? Let's take the word order. That's another very abused word by modern empirical, right? Modern empirical sciences presuppose that the world is ordered so that they can observe it, correlate the data into prediction-laden mathematical formalisms that can be changed depending on what new data is available, right? But order itself is not an object that's even remotely accessible to the modern empirical sciences. It's presupposed. Physics. What does physics study? Physics studies changeable being under a certain aspect. What is that aspect? Motion, physical motion, right? You can, what physics has to do is it can't put motion as an object on a laboratory bench and say, I'm studying motion. No, it observes over and over again, correlating, refining, hypothesizing, theorizing about objects that move, but not motion itself. Motion is not an object that can be studied by any means of physics. Objects that move can. The same thing with biology. You can ask the question, what does biology study? Well, if you want to be funny, you say biology studies nothing because it's not a rational being. Okay, what do biologists study? And most of the time, and I do this with students quite often, and even with other people, they say, oh, biology studies life. No, it doesn't. Not even remotely does biology study life, because you can't put a sensory accessible object that's measurable on your bench called life and study it as life. What you do is you observe an armadillo, you observe an oriole. If you're a paleontologist, you observe things from their perspective and so on. Biology studies living things or things that were alive. It never studies life. But that doesn't mean that biology is not useful for understanding what life is. And that's the beauty of the philosophy of nature. The philosophy of nature deeply, 100%, depends on every single physicist, biologist, chemist, sociologist, and whatever to answer the broader questions of what is motion, or in Aristotelian terms, what is change. A physicist can tell me that the first derivative of position with respect to time expressed mathematically is velocity. But I can also say quite truthfully that I was moved by the beauty of my wife. If I want to be reductive, I can say state one, I didn't even know about my wife. State two, I've gone into orbit, metaphorically speaking, about my wife. The philosopher of nature says, that's fantastic. Physics tell us more. Chemistry tell us more. Sociology tell us more. Shakespeare talking about Romeo's love for Juliet, tell us more so that we understand what motion is in its broadest sense.
Well, can I kind of want to ask something there, because it seems like there's some commitments that you would necessarily be making, if I'm understanding right, especially with like conservation of momentum, or maybe like, I don't know if you're familiar with existential inertia, like when you have the idea of like things seem to just persist unless disturbed or caused out of existence. It seems like you have some metaphysical baggage of like sustaining causes with what you're saying. If you're saying that there's some nature there to be studied, would that be accurate or no?
I'm not following what you meant by baggage and by
Well, it seems like those things that if you're referencing to like what momentum is or movement or whatever you would be referencing, it seems like you're committing to an idea of studying something ontologically that sustains the cause from time, right? It seems to be like the entailment of that to me. I could be wrong. It's sound.
With due respect, I think there's a bit of confusion as to. And please forgive me. I don't know you well enough to
say
this with any kind of, very little truth behind it. But, we'd have to spend a lot of time talking about what is a cause, what is causality.
Sure.
And that's why I kind of am pushing back on that. Because I'm not quite sure, and likely this is my fault. I'm not capturing the formulation. By existential inertia, okay, we might be able to speak about existential inertia, but we always have to back up to our primary analogate, inertia itself, right? How do we know about inertia? We know it from physical objects. Can we then extrapolate, getting away from the univocal language of the modern empirical sciences, to reason toward higher verities, like my example of motion with respect to being moved by my wife, or the inertial motion of something from another aspect? Sure, of course. But that presupposes something very important. The understanding that you can use language univocally, equivocally, and analogously. The modern empirical sciences reject analogous language. They have to. I would argue they have to.
Well, wouldn't the language be arbitrary, but the actual patterns at which, like, you would use, like, language semantics, like logic or things like that, be related to?
I'm sorry.
Well, because when you're making, like, it sounds like you're making the kind of that equivocation between being moved by your wife or movement, right? And then it sounds like you're underlying the language that might be being used there.
That's exactly what I'm not stating.
Okay.
Exactly what I'm not stating. I'm saying that you can't use either equivocal or univocal language when you reason about higher verities. If I'm speaking about being moved by the beauty of my wife, I'm not talking about dx dt, but I am talking about a change in me. The responsibility of telling us what dx dt is with respect to physical objects is the physicists. The burden is on the natural philosopher to explain in the broadest sense what motion is. That includes physics, chemistry, sociology, whatever, economics, whatever you want across the board. The reduction from potency to act. There's no physicist that can disagree, no sociologist that can disagree that change, it can be stated quite truthfully as the reduction from potency to act. But then each one under their own aspect studies those deeply, and they have to be able to be freed to study those things deeply, and they have to rely on the univocal terms that they use. They have to be extremely, from that perspective, precise about their language. Physics has to be precise about its language. A neutrino is this and nothing else unless some other new information comes about. But what does it mean to be an object? Oh, that's a different question, a far more ranging question, one that a physicist alone cannot describe. In fact, let me turn the tables. A philosopher of nature can't describe it by himself. He needs the information and the knowledge gained by each of the particular sciences, again, to buttress and ground the general universal understanding of what change is, what causation is, and so on and so on.
Sure. I'll just be real brief. We can get maybe to the pot-act thing, because that might be something I actually would reject is what's needed. Because, like, in the formulations I've seen, at least with potency to act, it seems that, like, they depend on some premise, and I wouldn't say you do this, but from what I've seen and why I can't commit to it, seems to commit to something like nothing can have no potential can be actualized unless some potential actualizes it, right? And I could just give examples of a chair or a car outside that has the potential to be, painted blue with a paintball gun or something, and at some moments after, and then the potential for it to remain the same doesn't need anything to actualize it, right? Because at T4, the potential is actualized merely by that in itself. So it seems like the formulations of those I always have problems with, because it seems to kind of cave in or fall in on itself. I know you don't have probably a specific formulation you're going to necessarily give, but does that?
What is the actual problem with suggesting that every contingent being must have an explanation for its existence?
What's the problem with? Sorry, say it again. Digest it?
This touches upon what you said. What exactly is the problem with the understanding that every contingent existent requires a cause for its existence?
I would say off the bat, it seems to take. You would be looking at a small sample size of particulars and then inferring that they all share the same property. That might be a problem. I don't know if that is a problem, but that could be.
I'm waiting for a response.
Yeah, so wouldn't it be a problem for you to just take every particular and then assume the set, given that you have a very small sample size, to then infer that the whole must have at least the same property or part to it, right?
There's some other issues I can also bring up.
And that would just be off the top of my head, which seemed like it seems like it could, depending on what you're going with on contingency, it could be an issue of a composition division fallacy, just to say that you look at the properties, right, and then infer that to the whole.
Until we see an example of an existent that doesn't need an explanation or a cause for an existence, I hold to what we've observed and thought about.
Sure, but isn't that just a black swan fallacy?
That's got nothing to do with the black swan fallacy, because all you're doing in a black swan fallacy is look. Well, in fact, let me bring that back. Hold on. Mm-hmm. I am accepting that. If someone can show me an example, someone can show me an example of an existent that has no cause for its existence, mm-hmm. that needs no explanation for an existence, I'm sticking with what we have observed over the centuries. As soon as something like that is actually demonstrated, I'm first on board to jump. I think
that's a reasonable position to hold. I don't hold that to the intuition of it, just based on like maybe understanding of causal principles not being related to the initial item as opposed to the contingent things, right?
But then you've got a very difficult problem. You're entertaining something that has never been demonstrated to be true.
So doesn't the proposition, right, have to be demonstrated to be necessarily true, right? I mean, especially if we're going to take it to such a high metaphysical level, it seems that the a priori kind of assessment there seems to be. It seems a little brash, at least for me.
What I said a priori.
Well, I guess if you're using it inductively, yeah, sure, you're gathering it through experience, but
no a priori there. We've observed for centuries. This is the way all existence, right, have come into being. They have a cause. Please don't start with quantum mechanics, because I know quantum mechanics very well. And
that's not usually my objection. I don't have any expertise into that to speak upon it. It would just be hubris. But no, it's more so that I can't say that I think that I could conclude, for similar reasons of like a first premise of the Kalam, that I feel like I would be justified in even making that leap. So
just so you know, I rejected the Kalam argument on its face. On its face.
Sure. Yeah, I was just relating. First. But no, but I understand. Like, I wouldn't reject your position of saying, well, hey, yeah, you know what, I agree. Kind of show me that, and then I don't believe. I think that's a rational position. I just don't. I think the data. Sorry, Cease, I've talked way too much. Let me get you into it.
There's a few things I'm trying to figure out how to approach this, because a lot was said, and my brain is kind of zapping in all kinds of different directions here. At face value, when you said So you brought up this idea of necessary versus contingent. I've always had the problem where it seems to me to even assume contingency is to think that we have a higher access to ontology than I think we actually do.
Why?
Because how could we know what is? I'm sorry, what?
By observation.
But what is it about observation that can tell us the nature of things as being necessary or contingent? By observation, this is another thing I was going to bring up as well. I'm not certain that just through pure observation, we are justified in talking about objects the way that we are in this conversation. Like, where does an object start or begin? Like, where does a chair? If I take an atom out of a chair, and then I take another atom out of a chair, at what point is that object still what it used to be before I took the atom out?
Well, explain that in the Shipathesia. Because it's an artifact. You can make an artifact be anything you want to.
Right, but isn't that a problem for this idea that these objects have natures, as opposed to be more how the functions that we attribute to these things? Like
you raise the word functions. That's at the core of the definition of what a nature is. A nature, somewhat crudely stated, is the locus of all functions unique to that thing. To that kind of thing. We can observe. There's no way that you cannot observe that a kangaroo has a certain locus of functions and actions that as a whole are unique to it, that you can distinguish quite readily from, let's say, a cousin like the wallaby, not to speak of a fish, not to speak of a rock.
Sure.
You can observe all that. The philosophy of nature is demanding that we open our eyes to the real world, not engage in the shamanism of, well, maybe I can, like Hume, which is just rankles me to no end, because we've never observed causality, therefore it's just a tradition that we have. Are you out of your mind? There are literally many things that we can't see that are completely inaccessible to our five primary and whatever other extra bodily senses that we have, and yet we know not that they exist, not only that they exist, but what they are. Descartes' famous example of the chilagon is a perfect one. You cannot see ever, you can't imagine, and I use the word imagine, a chilagon, but you know exactly what it is. You can conceive of it. You come upon a crime scene. You hear the baby crying and wailing. You hear the screeching of the getaway car's wheels. You could, if you tasted the candy, it would be sweet, sickly sweet. Yada. Engage all the senses that you want. Not a single one of those senses will see an injustice perpetrated. Now, if we're going to be rational about this, and we're going to always use the word injustice, except when we get into salons where we begin questioning ourselves, then we have to admit to that stuff.
Right. So I think this is where there is some conflict is a harsh word, but where I think there's some disagreement.
Please.
Because to me, yes, we can talk about justice as an abstraction, but you seem, correct me if I'm wrong, but what you seem to be suggesting is that there's something immaterial that we are abstracting from these things that we also know exists.
What do you mean by the word abstraction? Be very clear what you mean by the word abstraction.
That you said none of our senses tell us what justice is, but nonetheless.
I didn't say that. I said they don't have access to justice.
Okay, so what would you say does have access to it? Our rationality to reflect on these?
Yes, of course.
Right.
That's what makes us the standout creature, as far as we know, the only rational beings that we know of. We are able to rationalize precisely because we can reflect back upon the extremely important information that's coming to us through our senses. That's why the sciences are fundamental to the modern empirical sciences are fundamental to our understand the real world, but they are not foundational. Foundational is a much deeper thing. It's a thing that brings everything together. Without the modern empirical sciences, philosophy would be dead. Philosophy depends on the reflections, on the observations, on the data, on the knowledge that each of the particular sciences brings. Philosophers desperately need that knowledge. But then you can take that further to reason to higher verities. Causality is not something that's studied by the modern empirical sciences, but the philosophy of nature can reflect upon the gifts that the natural sciences give us to come to some understanding of what.
So I'm trying to.
Can you guys still see me? Oh yeah, I can.
Yeah, it just keeps cutting out audio, but I think it's like a StreamYard feature or something that's doing it. I don't know, or the phone maybe.
Let me give you another example where I'm quite critical of a Christian philosopher, Craig, primarily because he holds to something that I think is just completely untenable, but he holds to it very tenaciously. He holds to what's called the univocity of being notion. In other words, everything that exists in exactly the same way. And if you go to his textbook on page 189, he tells you point blank, a carbon atom exists like the number 12. And you scratch your head and you go, really? That's interesting. How much does the number 12 weigh? What's its position? How big is it? Because I can tell you all sorts of stuff about the carbon atom, thankfully through physics and chemistry. But none of those will tell me anything about what 12 or even the concept of number is. That's, if I were to perhaps unfairly summarize or congeal into one point, the great awakening, if you want to put it that way, for me, was that I realized that reality is not of one kind. It's multifaceted. A ball exists in a completely different way from the color that ball is, a completely different way from the mathematical being of reason that describes the trajectory of the ball, a completely different kind of being that the shadow that's cast by the ball is, and so on and so on. Each one of those shows, just by sheer observation, you know that reality is jointed, if you will. It's not one. It doesn't exist as one thing. They're very, very, well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm trying to process what you're saying, because I think, so I can agree with you that we can describe reality on multiple ontological levels. I can describe, kicking a soccer ball a certain way. And I can talk about the soccer ball as a combination of atoms that behave in a particular way. Like I can describe these things through different languages.
Sure.
I'm not sure that I understand why that would entail that reality itself would exist in a number of different ways in relation to itself in the way you've described it. I agree with you that physics is about relations of objects. And I agree with you that in talking about forces, it doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about them the same way that we would talk about a rock. But what I don't understand is, and correct me if I'm misrepresenting you, but it's in the conclusion that therefore, somehow physicalism or reductionism is failing to grasp reality.
It's not.
But when you talk about justice, when you say things like, it sounds like you're talking about a different kind of
Yeah.
reality there that's beyond the physical.
Yeah. Who's the it's really painful for me to have his name escape me. The philosopher, the evangelical philosopher from Notre Dame. He's now professor emeritus. Oh gosh, what is his name? He often criticizes philosophical and methodological naturalism. What is his name? Famous philosopher from Notre Dame.
I could Google famous philosopher from Notre Dame and see if it pops up.
You might be able to do that.
From my perspective, there is, I think, and again, I don't mean this in any way disrespectfully, just my perception.
Alfred Fredetto, maybe?
No. He's not.
Peter Van Eenwagen?
No.
Oh, you're talking about Plantinga.
Yes, Plantinga.
Yeah. I don't know why I didn't just think that. I was like, wait.
Yeah.
It's okay. I was there with you on the brain fart. So
Plantinga is a very interesting and very honest philosopher. I believe to my core he's a very honest guy. But when he criticizes, I think his criticisms of methodological naturalism are misdirected.
yeah, I read that in your article. I was very interested on your take on that and his getting on the ID proponent. But yeah, it was a very interesting take you had. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's enough. Let you guys go ahead.
Well,
no,
I was just going to say,
continue, Caesar. You guys, I don't want to interrupt.
I was just going to say a number of things, because a lot of was put on the table. When you say that the science presupposes order,
doesn't it?
I don't think it does. I think it observes order, but I don't think it's tied down to the, obviously to do science, we need order to be there. But the same way you were describing observing nature, the nature of things. I think science is observing patterns and then commenting on those patterns. I don't think it has to presuppose.
And what is the very basis for those patterns to even exist as patterns? Let me emphasize that. Under the aspect of as patterns, qua patterns. What does it depend on? Patterns only exist in order. Order has to be there. Otherwise, it's not a pattern. Now, just because you can't touch, feel, taste, smell, position like poor Hume can't causality, just because you can't do that for order doesn't mean it doesn't exist in some way. I'm not saying that it exists like a rock. It certainly doesn't. But our very ability to speak, moreover, to depend on order, to be able to do the good work that the natural sciences can do, has to point to something.
Would you say like the neurophysiological?
How is it being presupposed? How is it being presupposed? I agree with you that to observe patterns. I mean, the question is order something that continues on, or is it something that we observe and then it gives way to chaos? Like, what is?
Edna, without order, there is no way that any scientist could make a prediction.
I agree with you.
Presupposition. It is a presupposition for a prediction for order to be there. Presupposition.
Okay. So you're saying two things. One, I entirely agree with, which is for science to function, it has to, and for science to be able to make predictions, there has to be order. 100% with you.
Correct.
Why does a presupposition, as opposed to an observation, like using the tool because we can use a tool because there is the order?
Because there's no tool in the sciences that can observe order.
But isn't the observing of the order demonstrated in the capacity to make those predictions? And
how does that undermine the existence of order? Point one.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, fine.
It confirms it, is what I'm saying.
Okay, so you're confirming to me that whatever we term this thing order to be, consider this thing order to be, it's there.
Right.
Now, okay, order exists. Great. The natural sciences can't study order. They studied things that are ordered. That's where the order, if you will, exists. That's why the beingness of things can be described either as form, as substance, as what are the other two? Form, substance, essence, and nature. Nature, again, is the locus of all actions unique to that kind of thing. The thing is itself ordered. A rock is ordered. It happens to be, I don't want to say controlled. That's exactly the opposite of what I want to say. The four things that basically account for the existence, the physical existence of a rock, are the four forces of nature. Now let's move up to the plant world, which is a completely new joint. Okay, what other capacities does a plant have that a rock doesn't have? Well, if you're talking about sagebrush, it can even move. Not really, but okay. But reproduction, homeostasis, the ability to consume and grow, rocks don't do that. Let's move up to the brute animals. You can add to the brute animals locomotion, specialization. Then you move up to human beings. Another new capacity or ability arises that none of the lower ones have. We observe that. There's no denying that we don't observe that. So let's call a spade a spade. Rocks are fundamentally, ontologically different from human beings, from plants, from brute animals. They are different. Let's study those differences. Let's wrap our minds around what we literally observe, right? Let's actually do that. Let's not be Alexander Rosenbergs of the world who tell us, I'm a consistent atheist and physicalist. You're not even thinking, sir. Okay. Why are we here?
Yeah.
Why here?
No, it's weird because as you speak, I find myself, both agreeing with, most of what you're saying, but then there are certain points to where it's like, I kind of lose you a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, let me say one thing, just because of what you just mentioned.
Sure.
Any philosopher or scientist who denies qualia, as who denies experience as or that there is a what it's like,
Right.
I think that is the craziest thing I've ever heard.
Wait, let me stop you on that. But can you rationally and succinctly explain why?
Why it's crazy?
Why you hold that it's a crazy idea?
Because I think it is because experience, the what it's like, is as basic and as what's the word I'm looking for? I think Descartes uses. No. I think it's the one self-evident thing.
I agree with you, and you're going a little planting on us. The basic notions, right?
Sure.
I agree with you. I wholeheartedly agree with you. What I'm suggesting is, okay, let's rationalize about this stuff. Let's think about this stuff. Let's call a shadow not a being, but a privation of being.
But when you talk, but I think that the problem where we run into a wall, I feel, is when you talk about science doesn't observe order; it observes things in order. It seems to me like I don't see order as this form. Like it's a description of the way in which reality seems to operate, as far as we can tell. So I agree with you that the force isn't the rock. It's a way to describe a relationship among things. But that doesn't suggest to me an ontology beyond the physical. This means that there is a gap between the description and the thing itself. But based on that, should we assume a more complex ontology? And this kind of goes to the first thing you said, which we talked about. It's not a scientific. I'm sorry, what?
Because we observe it, Adna. We observe it. It's there in front of us.
We observe what specifically?
We observe things that behave in an orderly way. I observe things in the realm of physics that behave in an orderly way. If I couldn't make predictions. I observe things in chemistry that behave in an orderly way. If I couldn't, then I couldn't make predictions, and science would be gone. Sociology, economics, whatever. All I'm suggesting is that the philosopher of nature steps back and he sees, okay, motion, causality, order from their perspective, motion, order, causality from their perspective, motion, order, causality from the economic perspective, motion, order, causality from such and such perspective, and says, okay, let's ask the fundamental question. What is order? What is causality? What is motion?
Could I add to that though? Like, wouldn't, from a perspective that accounts for that, right? So if we have two, like a competing theory of where you're saying what are these things that adds this kind of, and I know you might not agree, but I think that it adds some ontological baggage. If something like a naturalism can explain those things without assuming some new ontology, and we look at it and it has maybe the same explanatory power, but naturalism is simpler, I mean, wouldn't you agree that that would be the better theory to take? I mean, it's not adding extra entities that aren't necessary, and it has the exact same explanatory scope, or perhaps better. So it's sorry, Ed.
Show me where naturalism defines with verifiable references what order is.
Well, so I
think this is a category problem. Because I think
it's a category problem. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
That's the whole
right.
It is a category problem. That's the whole reason why Aristotle brought it to our attention. That's why he wrote the categories. He had to find a language to explain things that were related analogously, but then could be understood univocally in more narrow senses. And they all marry together and support each other. It doesn't contradict. In fact, it helps. I'm telling you, Edna, with all my cards on the table, first of all, to really give you a lot of credit. When I first started learning this stuff, I was like, no way. There's no way this can be true. It took years. And this was challenge upon challenge, reading upon reading, discussion upon discussion. And double and triple doubting myself over and over and over again until I kind of like, okay, look, it's there. It's staring me in the face. By the way, the very word object, do you know the etymology behind the word object? Ob yakere, to throw at. An object throws itself at us. It's saying, I am here. Come and know me.
I think where I find myself, and this is in part because of my exposure to Wittgenstein, when he talks about the field of vision, what it is that we can talk about.
Sure.
It seems to me that what we have is the appearance of things. What we have is useful ways in which we can talk about the world that help us navigate the world. But from my perspective, this doesn't show any of these things as being fundamental. It's obviously useful to talk about a causality. Again, I'm not the physicist here, but in conversations that I've had with physicists that we both know, there seems to be a conflict there with looking at causality as fundamental rather than emergent. Not just dealing with one aspect. When we're talking about objects, I'm not sure that it is in front of us as clearly as we're describing. I think when you start to sort of try to really differentiate between things, to me, it doesn't seem as obvious that these things are there are emergent differences, but I'm not sure that we can infer the ontology to the degree in which you. And again, maybe I may be misunderstanding you, but when you talk about metaphysics, what I'm left is, well, if there are other ways beyond the scientific method to know, then what way do we have to compare metaphysics and say that one system of metaphysics is preferable to another system of metaphysics?
Track record. Based on the track record.
If
I can tell you from the Aristotelian Thomist perspective that motion, i.e., not just kinesis, but change, is the reduction from potency to act. I'm open to correction, but I'm going to give you example upon example upon example from every single one of the particular, natural, and otherwise sciences that, yeah, of course that's correct.
So
I don't.
here's
I
where
would. Sorry, I just
Sorry.
want to be pedantic. Do you have like? I'm really into propositional logic. Do you have any syllogism on how your specific pot to act works? Because that's what I'm really interested in. Because when I get those usually put out, it's usually where I can discern the problems right away with them, in which I wouldn't accept a certain premise. But if you don't, I wouldn't want to be pedantic and be like, do it now. But in future conversations, if you have that, I'd love to look at it because
They're completely fine. Not one syllogism that's going to explain to you something. Yeah. Part of the baggage that we moderns carry is that when we think of Aristotle saying potency and act, that he's talking about parts of things. That couldn't be further from the truth. He's not talking about parts of things. Things aren't made up of like dirt in a rug out of potency and act. That's nonsense. The Aristotle, the same thing with the criticisms of his teleology, as if the most oft repeated, way off misdirected criticism that I've heard of teleology over and over again is that it's some magic force from the future telling things how to move. That's nonsense. And Aristotle actually criticizes that.
Well, you would take like a per se kind of like a my hand moves the stick, moves the ball type of like that general kind of outline of the.
That's a per se causal change.
Exactly. Yeah. Would you like hold to that in some way?
But there are per accidens causal effects. Right?
Sure. Just chance events or.
No. A chance event has a very
father's father. Is that the example that's typically given?
Exactly.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah.
Per accidens. That's a per accidens causal chain of events. But me, hitting a rock, which does something else, you remove one, the whole causal chain collapses, which is what Aquinas was talking about. He wasn't talking about accidents. But why is everyone enamored with per accidens? Because the natural sciences do those.
So do you?
Sure. Sorry. There's the last point on the per se thing. Because like I like think there's utility in looking at it in that way, but I don't think it gets you like. I don't know if where it gets you to the ontological kind of thing that's. I wouldn't want to say assumed or that you're going for there because like it seems to terminate at me, right? In the same way, like there's nothing like if I stop to move my hand, then that stops the potency to act. There's really nothing and we could go strip that down to the earth, but then what is the earth being held up by something? There seems to be these kind of breaks in the chain that I find right away from it.
Talking exactly what Aquinas criticized.
Okay.
Exactly what he criticized. Mm-hmm. It's exactly the same criticism that can fairly, and I would say with some derision, be imposed upon Dawkins. You have got to keep those things separate.
On who?
On Dawkins. Have you read Dawkins's criticism of the five ways? It's
I don't typically.
It's embarrassing.
Like Richard Dawkins from my perspective, but that's not like a recent thing with the statements he said. I've just never really liked Richard Dawkins, but I like him from his evolution, like, from a science standpoint and just things like that, but not really his philosophy or things he has to say on that. So.
But that's what happens, right? That's what happens when we don't actually begin to rationalize and come to some position on things. You get the Dawkinses, the Tegmarks, the who's the Cosmos guy, Tyson, who's his predecessor on the Cosmos, Sagan. You get some of the most ridiculous, absolutely stupid things said about reality by these people, and you begin to look at them and thinking, holy cow, you're behaving like a Hollywood star who thinks that just because they're a Hollywood star, they can make pronouncements on human rights in Afghanistan. I mean, what? Let's talk about what a human right is. Do you even understand, sir, what the word right means before you start getting on your skirt-chasing bandwagon because you're a Hollywood star?
real quick, because I wanted to respond to what you said about the track record. To me, the problem that you run into is, it's a concept of underdetermination of theories, where, yes, you can have a narrative that, post hoc, you can say, well, this explains all these things, and has successful track record in the way in my outlook, but other views can do the same thing, right? And it's other metaphysics can claim the same thing, can claim its own narratives that explains the same facts.
Can they? I've compared the different types of metaphysics that are out there. I can only find one. I'm sorry, but it's true. I can only find one who satisfies my intellectual curiosity enough to and humility of those or lack thereof of those subject matters, right? To address real questions. Please don't misunderstand me. I am not saying that order or causality exist like, my computer mouse. I'm not saying that. Just
Right.
like I'm not saying, and I'm agreeing with Aristotle, that potency and act are not parts of something, right? That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that something is there. We've observed it over and over and over again. And the best narrative that I've found is this one. Now,
Okay.
I'm always open to new stuff, right? Quantum mechanics is a wonderful thing because it challenges the philosopher of nature to say, okay, we can't get rid of causality like so foolishly Hume tried to do. But isn't this wonderful? Quantum mechanics provides us another insight onto causality.
So let me ask you about that real quick. Let me ask you about that because, again, I'm not, quantum mechanics is not my field. I can barely comprehend it. But from my understanding, from conversations that we've had on this show before, is that causality seems to be an emergent property, not a fundamental one.
Okay.
It seems.
Then back it up.
What do you mean?
No, seriously. I hear that stuff all the time. They say that velocity is an emergent property of change in motion.
Oh, right. Okay.
Well, I mean, it would be backed up by the specific model that's trying to drive the predictions.
Here's an example. From what's been explained to me, and again, this may be faulty, but is that if you look at what we see as effects of the causes, and you kind of rewind the tape, like you drop a glass, the glass shatters. If we rewind the tape to the shattered glass coming back into the cup, no laws of physics have been violated, which to certain quantum physicists suggests that causality is much like reading a book. You have all the chapters in a book all exist, but it's in the reading from the first chapter to the last that this notion of a story emerges.
That's a very, very, and I apologize for saying it this way, but I have to, that's a very weak, limping analogy.
Okay.
I mean, you're comparing a story, something that's produced by a rational agent, to the mechanical motions of objects. And you're trying to say that, well, because this happens, therefore, in another sense, emergent properties explain this. And I'm like, wait. That's shamanism.
No. I'm saying no. It's not that emergent properties explain this. It's that our assumption that there is this one arrow of time, that there's causes on one hand and effects on the other, seems to be problematic when you reverse that, and nothing seems to be violated in the context of physics. I mean, it's not me saying this, right? Like I'm not the physicist.
No, I get that, but I can suggest to you that. Among other things, physicists are among the worst people to turn to understand what is time, what is mass, what is matter. I mean, they're the worst people to talk
So
about.
I would want to push back that because and I know this is going to be a competing worldview thing, right? Obviously, but they're the ones that would be generating predictions at which, from my epistemic framework, matters to me. Where if I looked at the form, or if I compared metaphysics, none of that would matter to me because I still am left with what C said at the beginning of the show, which is that I am left with this imaginative thing that my brain can produce, as opposed to
But
actually reflecting that to reality in some way. Because like I can look at things and decide that's the case, but what is the actual mechanism at which is going to determine that I have some reliability? And you gave an example at the beginning of like the kid walks outside and then he gets punched, right? He's going to learn from that. Well, that's not like what we mean by novel predictions at all. That's just like an event happening, something novel, or is going to be some new thing that we predict based off of, certain assumptions and things like that, right? I mean, it's not going to be just walking outside, I got hit, now I know not to do that. There's a more premeditated aspect in regards to the data.
I would suggest that you're looking at that from a utility or operational perspective. Of course, I'm not disagreeing with you. Of course, you can get it along. We turn on our cell phones and we don't even know what's going on quantum mechanically or general relativity that makes that thing possible. Okay, and we go on, but you're still left with the question: what is time? And you have to answer it. You can't just say, well, it's useful for me to just make predictions about something that's going to happen in 10 seconds and then not address the very question, what is time? What do you mean?
Right. No, I agree with you there, but I'm in agreement with you, but what I don't understand is how your framework satisfies these questions if your framework, unless you're saying that your framework makes the same kind of null predictions that the scientific method does, in which, so if it doesn't, then how do we verify?
It shouldn't make those predictions. The predictions that the modern empirical sciences make are based wholly, starting in the senses, things that can be observed / measured, that can be correlated into mathematical formalisms that help us make predictions from which we test through hypotheses and so on.
Yeah, but isn't that like defined simply by that, right? Like, I mean, that's the one that's done the work for it. I guess that's my contention, is that like that's like when we're saying what is this thing and then we juxtapose it to something else. Well, the novel predictions and what we reference to time or something have to do with that to actually like have a contrary opinion to it. It seems that you would have the work left to just go, well, here's the redefinition of time, right? As opposed to
ask the question, why is that always avoided?
What's the question? I'm sorry. What's the question?
What is time? And
it's ongoing series of sequences.
But this is the key issue. This
that
is
you
the
measure within increments or arbitrary limits, depending whether it's minutes, hours, weeks, months, years, things like that.
He brought that up as a flawed example.
Which one?
24. The very one about the how did you say, the subsequent chain of things happening, whatever way you said it. That was one of the things that Aristotle criticized 2,400 years ago. He said that's not time. We have to ask ourselves, what is time? I'm underscoring the word is because that's at the basis of the ontological question. What is time? We have to be honest with ourselves.
Sure. So like a presentist, right, is going to say that there's no future events, right? But wouldn't that just be their objection to how we define time?
Nope, that is not the point. The point is, if you can't answer the question, what is time, then you really don't have a solid basis for having confidence in using time to do your studies. Can you make predictions? Sure, but predictions aren't the thing.
But that's the thing, though. Science, when we talk about time, we have done that. We have defined it a specific way. It might not be the right way, which is why this is undermined. This is why this is underlined and highlighted by fallibilistic approaches, right? Because it could be the case. It's not absolute certainty. So when you ask what is time, you're asking a question to physics that seems that they've done the work for that. It seems that if you were to say what is it, and that's not satisfactory, well, then the novel predictions need to be driven from your assessment of time. That seems to be the better way of at least solving that.
Physics has not answered or provided a definition of time ever. What physics has done is provided an operational definition, and that is a huge difference. Physics tells you that the second, let's say the unit of time, is 38 million something vibrations, hertz, if you will, of a certain state of cesium transitioning from one energy level to another. And the philosopher goes, dude, that is awesome, right? That is awesome. Thank you very much from that. From the perspective of physics, thank you. But then the philosopher of nature goes, what is change in a leaf? To the biologist. There you get a whole different ballgame. And then he goes to an economist. What does it mean for derivative changes to happen in the market? And then the philosopher of nature goes, man, these sciences are so awesome because they are helping me with data upon which I can reflect now and ask the buttressing question. What is change? What is time? That is the focus.
Well, I'm left with this problem, which is, on what grounds that is your metaphysics the answer?
I'm not saying it's the answer. It's the one that I find most able to answer the plethora of questions that I have.
But I guess my question is, how does it? I guess maybe this is why we should have future conversations, if you're willing, because what I don't understand is if you are removing novel predictions as
I'm not. Why would you say that, Etna?
Then maybe I misunderstood you because
maybe I can say, or Edna or Cesar, you saying it seems to be those are removed in favor of post hoc assessments of the data that which you have, because that's what I see. I see it's more so just I have the data and I can kind of look at certain proclaimed metaphysics and post hoc rationalize it, which seems to just be under determination problem in philosophy of science. Like that's why I read that, and I'm not doing that to like paint a bad picture. That's just from my perspective. It just those are the things that I try to avoid, at least in my worldview. So that's the red flag that pops in my head.
Well, Alex, I say that because earlier you said that the method of science, as far as the measurement and focusing on the predictive power, these are not what will give us the answers that you think are fundamental. This seems to be
that's not quite what I'm getting at. From one perspective, I might agree with that, but we're not doing, like the philosopher of nature or the metaphysicist doesn't or shouldn't do things simply because they think they need an overall answer. That is not the reason.
Sure.
That is not the reason. The reason is because they want to understand in the very way that the very first line of Aristotle's Metaphysics starts, all men want to know.
Yeah,
we
of course.
want to know what time is, not as a self-serving exercise in navel gazing.
No, of course not.
To know,
no, but I agree.
So that the other sciences can go, gosh, when a leaf changes color, it is reduction from potency to act. When a thing changes its position from here to here, it is reduction from potency to act. When I fall in love with my wife, it is a reduction from potency to act. So we now have a foundational basis upon which to understand change. And we go, this is our gift to you, sciences. You have bequeathed to us, all of you, a wonderful set of data and gifts so that we can reflect on it. We're giving to you in the broadest sense what is change. It actually strengthens you because now you can't just assume, well, this is what we physicists do. No, you have to go extra physics to provide foundational stuff so that the physicist, in a sense, can feel safe.
So I think I think we've hit at the core issue here, which is that I don't see how your metaphysics, what method you have to justify your metaphysics. Well, I think that's what the problem I run into is, how do I know that we're describing that you're saying you think is the case? Is not purely imaginary. It's not post hoc descriptions. And I don't mean that with disrespect. I just don't understand it, because if you're saying that the tools of science are great, but they're limited in their scope, which I can probably agree with you about, I don't understand what the alternative is and how it is that your metaphysics can be justified.
It's not either or. It's an and. It's not an alternative. It's not look, there is no way any metaphysicist or philosopher of nature in good standing would suggest that they know better or alternatively, how to describe the flight of a bumblebee. That would be nonsense. That would be the first thing that they should be fired as a philosopher.
No, sure, but you're saying that but it can describe better what is time, what is causality, what is existence, right?
The philosophy of nature cannot describe time from the perspective of physics. The philosophy of
Sure, right.
can't describe time from the perspective of a biologist. The philosophy of nature cannot describe what time or changes from the perspective of a derivative marketer in economics. But what philosopher of nature can do is step back and see the unifying thread under all of those and say, dude, this is not just disparate subject matters. This is a symphony working together. And sometimes you actually need a conductor. It's not that the conductor is better than any of the players or a group of instruments. That would be nonsense.
So okay.
Ordering, that there is an ordering that takes place that helps all of them work together.
So
right.
So I understand the analogy. I think that's a great analogy. I think where I'm stuck on is how do, again, you've said that your perspective has been the one that's been convincing to you, and I think in the future, I hope you'll come back. I would like to understand why it is that you're convinced in the successes of your metaphysics as opposed to different types, and on what grounds one can justify one metaphysic as opposed to another.
Right. I'm only convinced to the extent that I'm only one human being living in a very narrow part of history. So I'll admit that immediately, right? But from what I've seen and compared, it's not because I'm convinced like 100% certitude. It's
Sure.
So far, it's the best kid on the block. Am I open to more? Pardon my French, I'm damn straight I'm open to more.
So how you arrive at that conclusion is what I'm interested in. How you arrive at that observation.
Because, and this is where I sympathize greatly with your position, Edna. I can't give it to you as a soundbite.
Of course.
It's been years and years and years. I mean, I'm failing to come up with an example. Oh, motion. Let's go back to motion. Again, I don't mean to be quizzing you in a pedantic sense. I'm just asking you. Do you guys know the Greek words entelechia and energia when it's applied by Aristotle to change?
Oh yeah, of course. No, I don't.
Well, but that's my point. Right?
Yeah, no.
It's not meant as a criticism. It's meant that there's so many little things that go into this thing, right? Energia, unbelievable dynamism. Entelechia, telos is in the center of that. It's an order thing. Telos means ordered. It doesn't mean like there's some mystical force out there.
No, right. It just means...
right? But it's those little. It's a mountain of those little things that have built up. That, trust me, I have tried to undermine. And I can't.
See, it's interesting because my experience has been the opposite, where I was trying to hold on to these ideas some of these ideas that you're expressing now, that you had tried to undermine. I was trying to hold on to them. And in my reading, and in my examining philosophy, and I think Wittgenstein has been extremely helpful in where I'm at currently in the way that I see these things. I think my conclusions about reality seem to be quite opposite to yours at this point in time.
Sure.
And it's funny that you're saying that what you believe now were things you were trying to undermine. What you believe now is what I used to believe and wanted to hold on to, and has slipped away from my perspective.
Oh no, I'm actively undermining. I actively undermine. I do.
Sure.
Let me put it to you this way, which I wish all people would practice. And I am no flag flyer for this, right? I fail in many cases. I wish people would take Aquinas' approach. What did he do? In every single, I mean, look at the Summa. In every single question that he posed, he always, without exception, posed in the absolute best light the opponent's objection.
Right, of course.
Absolutely. Man, I wish I could do that. But I know my marching orders from him. Put the opponent or the contrary idea in its best possible light before you try to understand it, let alone challenge it. It's a kind of version of C.S. Lewis's bulverism, right? Don't tell me that the guy is wrong.
Sure.
Explain to me why he's wrong.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because in a lot of aspects, like when I'm asking you things, you were straight like, no, I'm saying the opposite of that, which is nice, right? Because I want to apply a principle of charity. I don't want to just like, let me give this guy's crappiest position so that I can tear it down. I think that's just sophistry and just immature. But yeah, no, I'm interested for you to come back, because for this one, I really wanted to listen and understand. I hope the objections that I did possibly raise weren't off the mark, and hopefully as we go forward, I can fully understand them better, so that maybe we can kind of decipher those things better and whatnot.
Listen, I live for this stuff. I love to be in these kind of discussions. I will be forthright. I will be staunch. I will be, there's a certain, because I'm Slavic, right? There's a certain kind of, you hold your position until you see that the other guy understands, and then you start whittling away at your own position, right?
And well, let me and for the audience sake, because like I know some people have said, one person asked if you could simply give your position, and we talked before the show. You were very like, look, I mean, if you really want to understand, like we just talked about causal sequences, right, at the beginning, right. And then you were like, hey, I mean, we might not get very far until you really digest my position. That's not going to just be handed to you so quickly. So for the audience that would want a like a synopsis of the position going into this, we've kind of understood that we're going to be unpacking this kind of over time, rather than just
going forward, right?
Going forward and trying to just challenge and pick it apart, because I don't think that'd be fair.
Let's stay in touch, because I would like you to come back for sure if you're interested. From my perspective, I think there is a fundamental difference in principle between us, in the way in which we understand the value of methodologies and how they relate, and how because from my understanding, you see these things as complementary. These different frameworks as I see them as in conflict, and I want to kind of go into more detail as to why we see these things differently.
Yeah, you're right, and kudos to you, Etna. That is a very interesting question you're posing. That is a very interesting question. And I agree. My mindset is, I see complementarity. I see order. I love the fact that, using my previous metaphor, that things behave like a symphony, not like dissonant, separate things. You, if I understood you correctly, and correct me, not so much, right? Irrespective of our positions, the very question itself is quite an interesting one.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. And I think from my perspective, I'm far less, I would say this, I'm far more uncertain as to what degree, to what degree we can connect to the way things really are. I'm much more...
In a Kantian sense, are you saying that?
I think of it as the notion of the field of vision, where I think we can talk about the way things seem to be and the way things appear through our experience, but that we can infer an ontology from that, but I think it's much more limited from my perspective. And intuitively, I really struggle with the idea that there is an existence out there that is somehow beyond the physical.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you on that point, but what I would point out is that you are basically projecting some form of Kantian presuppositions that we can never know the thing itself. Let me be.
Well, I would say I don't. There's reasons why I don't think it's a presupposition, but I understand why you're saying that. But I think that's. I think we've hit the 140 mark here.
Yeah, I got to get rolling here. But if you guys want to stop there, if you have one more thing you want to add,
I'm good.
There. Okay. Well, then, Cease, what do you want to? If you want to add something, I don't want to take it away
the
from
only
you.
thing I'll say. The only thing I'll say is that I like you, Alex. I live for these conversations, and I really appreciate the back and forth. And
Yeah.
I think this was a good introductory episode to kind of understand where we're at.
Yep.
And hopefully in the future we can kind of go into more details as to why it is and where maybe some of the tension lies in the way that we see the world. So you just let me know when you're available to return, and you'll be welcome.
Let me, if you don't mind, one very quick thing. One thing did come to mind in terms of how I think we contrast. So let's take morality writ large, and maybe just let's right now limit it to understanding the difference between good and bad. Let's take morality. Yeah. In order to talk about reasonably morality, we need to understand what an act of a human is versus a human act, right? Okay, we get past that distinction, which presupposes we understand what a human is. Is a human simply a chance collection of things? Is it something less than an angel but more than a brute? Is it a god? Yada yada. Once you get to what a human is, then you ask the question, what is it to be? What is the isness of a human being? So then you see what I'm saying? You're going, I'm always going from, like, let's say in this particular example, morality to what is a human to what does it mean to be? And I'm always going in that direction.
I think I am too. I think I'm trying to do the same, but I think it's taking us to different conclusions for a number of reasons.
Okay.
Which I think we'll figure out as time goes by.
Good.
I think I'm trying to do the same thing. It's just that I think our intuitions are quite different ultimately.
Sure.
But
sure.
hey,
yeah.
Thanks again so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And if you ever write a book or anything, let me know. I would be very, very interested to read any.
I've got a long-term project to write a philosophy of nature from the perspective of a modern empirical scientist.
Yeah, I'd love to read that. I enjoyed your articles. I had to read them a few times. I'm just a really bad reader, but I like your writing style, and I think in a book, you have all that space to not be interrupted and get your points. I think that'd be a really good thing for some people to dive into.
You guys should ask me why on another occasion why I'm so vociferously opposed to intelligent design.
Yeah, and that was one thing when I read that I smirked and was like, okay, well we found something in common here, but yeah, no, thank you again, and appreciate it. Hopefully, if not the next episode, hopefully in the future we can have you on.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Take care.
See ya.
Yeah.
All right, guys, we're going to get out of here, and we appreciate everybody that joined us. I wanted to give one announcement to say that Cease was talking about connections, and his connection went out. So you need to fix that connection because you look like mashed potatoes right now. That's just that's just on my side. But anyway, guys, much love. We're 17 away. The real announcement is that we're 17 away from 1,000. So if you can share the channel with anyone you know, or if you have a secondary account, I'm not stopping you from using that to subscribe or anything. But no, we're close to getting to 1K, and it'd just be a cool number to see. We still got to reach our 4K watch hours before we're monetized, and I don't even know what that means for YouTube. Maybe that's like a Big Mac every month or something like that. But either way, we have that, and we have a Patreon that we'll be coming out with soon. We'll always do the show, so we're never gonna package this as funded by. We'll always do it, as long as we have the 25 for StreamYard, we're always gonna do it. But it does help. If we could make this our full-time job, then we would have more episodes. So it's always a good thing to do, but it's one of those things that it's not required, but definitely definitely cool. Watch us have 0 patrons, and I'm like, we're at 40 like years old, and we're like, shit, we should have said we needed this for money. Anyway, guys, much love. Peace out, and be good to one another. And yeah, don't be sophists in the comments. There's a lot of you today. Just stop with that. No one got destroyed. This is a discussion.